One of the biggest questions in basketball right now is who the next face of the NBA is going to be. I know who it is. Do you? Some of you will ask, what even is the face of the NBA and why it's important? The NBA has always been a stars-driven league, where it's more about the individual than it is the team. And as a result of that, throughout NBA history, there have been athletes who became bigger than the sport. We put these players on a pedestal above all, and that's because the NBA was built on individual stardom. Back in the 1970s, America's most popular sports were football, baseball, and boxing. Basketball was popular, but at the time college hoops was bigger than the pros. The NBA was struggling to find its identity, until two young players came along and changed everything. Magic Johnson and Larry Bird were the two best players in college basketball. The biggest debate in the country was who was better. So when the two met in the championship game of the 1979 NCAA tournament, it was the biggest game in basketball history. Over 40 million Americans watched it live. No basketball game at any level, NBA or college, has even came close to those viewing figures since. After Magic defeated Bird to win the title, fans were already too invested. They knew this rivalry was just getting started, and college fans followed them into the NBA. Magic Johnson became a Laker, Larry Bird became a Celtic. This amplified the rivalry even more. You had the best two players with a pre-established rivalry joining the two biggest NBA franchises who also had a pre-established rivalry dating back decades. The Magic and Bird rivalry defined the 80s. Every single year the NBA Finals featured one of the Lakers and Celtics, and they went head to head in the finals 3 times. But one day they got old, and the NBA needed something new. Then conveniently came along the guy who took the game global. Michael Jordan was already a household name coming into the NBA. He scored the game-winning shot to win the national championship at UNC. Unlike Magic and Bird, Jordan had no equal. He was head and shoulders above the next best player of his era, and because of this, he became a godlike figure. Every kid in the country wanted to be like Mike. Not only was he the best, but he was the most entertaining and exciting to watch. And on the biggest of stages, he'd rise to the occasion and win every single time. Michael Jordan transcended the sport. He was the best show on television and made people who had no interest in basketball become fans of the sport. When he retired, he was always going to be a tough act to follow. But Jordan had inspired an entire generation to be just like him. And one guy really was. Kobe Bryant was the perfect heir. Another 6'6" athletic shooting guard with a burning competitive desire to be the best ever. Although he fell short in the eyes of most, Kobe filled the void left behind by Jordan, who finally retired once and for all in 2003. That same year, a generational talent had burst onto the scene. You already know who he is, the most hyped draft prospect in NBA history, arguably the greatest high school player of all time, and the one who introduced himself to the basketball world as the chosen one. LeBron anointed himself King James. He dared to wear the number 23 jersey, and despite the almost impossible expectations placed upon him as a young boy, he not only lived up to them, he exceeded them. LeBron has had the longest prime of any player in NBA history. He has been an all-star 20 years in a row. When it comes to being the face of the league, history says you hold that title for a decade. Bird and Magic had the 80s, Jordan the 90s, Kobe had the 2000s. He shared the latter years with LeBron, who has been the face ever since. LeBron was supposed to pass the torch to guys like Kevin Durant and Steph Curry. These are guys who have been among the faces, but never the lone face of the NBA. And that's because LeBron went on for so long. He's only now, at nearly 40 years old, finally slowing down, but the guys that were supposed to replace him are starting to exit their primes as well. LeBron is 39, Curry is 35, and KD is 36. Despite the three of them knocking 40's door down, most people would still consider these three guys the biggest names in basketball. But why? Those three guys are not winning MVPs. They're not the ones competing for championships, nor are they spearheading the best teams in basketball. It's almost like we missed a generation. Why haven't the best players of today's NBA aged 30 and under stepped up and taken the torch from those guys like all the other greats did before them? Nikola Jokic and Giannis Antetokounmpo have been the best two players in basketball for the last 5 years. They're the guys with the best stats, winning MVPs, leading their teams to the best records and winning championships. But for whatever reason, both of those guys have been rejected as the face of the NBA, not just by the media, but by the fans. And it makes you wonder, what does it actually mean to be the face of the NBA? To figure this out, we have to look at what the previous faces all have in common. They were all at one point universally recognized as the world's best player. But clearly it's more than that. Being the best player in the NBA doesn't make you the face of the league. If that was the case, Jokic and Giannis would be the faces right now, and we wouldn't be having this conversation. So why have we rejected these guys? Is it because they're foreign? Is it because they play for small market teams? Is it because they're big men? What is it? I've heard this conversation several times, and I think a big part of it starts with the media. They have refused to fully embrace guys like Jokic and Giannis, and on massive basketball platforms like First Take and Undisputed, shows that play a huge part in controlling the narrative, they'd rather talk about playing teams like the Suns, Lakers and Warriors, or recycle debates old as time. They'll talk about anything but the guys that are really doing it in the NBA right now. Nikola Jokic is currently on one of the greatest 4-year stretches in NBA history. He has won 2 MVPs. Last season he averaged a 25-point triple-double, led the Nuggets to the 1 seed in the West. He didn't win MVP probably because of voter fatigue, then went on to be Finals MVP, won the title averaging historic numbers in the playoffs. This season he's currently leading the race to be MVP again. This will be his 3rd, probably should be his 4th. He's got a ring, he has the stats, he's still young to go on to accomplish much more in the sport, but for whatever reason, he isn't, nor will he ever be the face of the league. Clearly, we're just going to ignore Jokic until his time passes. Right now he's the champion sitting on the throne and still nobody seems to care. The debate they should be having every day on these platforms, where he currently ranks among the greatest players in NBA history and what he has to do to become the greatest center of all time. Whenever I hear the media talk about Jokic, they kind of just briefly acknowledge how great he is. They don't deny his greatness, but they don't really elaborate or expand on it very much either, and just go back to talking about whether or not the Lakers or Warriors will make the play-in. I've heard people say the reason for this is Jokic isn't marketable enough, and part of that may be his own doing. Jokic admittedly has no interest in being famous, he doesn't care for media, and JJ Redick made a good point, that whoever the next face is, has to want it. I do think there's some validity to that, but I think the truth is, whoever they is that decides these things, like who the face actually is, clearly they don't want it to be an international player. Because whenever I hear people having this conversation on television, they bring up potential candidates. Anthony Edwards, SGA, Jason Tatum. I've even heard Tyrese Halliburton be mentioned. But historically speaking, in order to be the face, not only do you have to be the best, but you have to become an all-time great. LeBron, Kobe, Michael, Magic, Bird were all the best, and we knew in real time they were on that Mount Rushmore trajectory. They are all considered among the 10 best players in NBA history, so whoever you decide to nominate as the face, you're not just banking on them becoming a multiple-time All-Star and maybe winning an MVP one day like Harden or Westbrook. You're picking them to become one of the greatest ever. Would you bet on SGA, Tatum, Ant-Man, or any of the young stars mentioned becoming a top 10, top 15 player in NBA history when it's all said and done? Have any of them done anything in their careers so far that give you any reason to believe that one day they'll be on the Mount Rushmore? If not, then they're not up to being the face of the NBA. And the truth is, outside of Jokic and Giannis, who have already been rejected, there is only one guy under 25 in the NBA right now we can all confidently agree is on that all-time great trajectory. It's Luka Doncic. He is clearly the best individual player among the current generation of young stars, and he's the one I'd bet my money on winning multiple MVPs and championships in the future. And yet whenever I see people having this conversation on television, Luka is rarely mentioned. Why is that? If Nikola Jokic really is an exception and is just too boring to be the face, and it has nothing to do with the fact he's European, then why haven't we already anointed Luka as the next face? Why is this even a discussion? You can't say he's too boring or not marketable enough. If you don't like Luka Doncic, you don't like NBA basketball. It's simple as that. So the only logical reason Luka Doncic wouldn't be the next face of the NBA is because he isn't American. And if that's the case, then we can already eliminate Victor Wembanyama from ever being the face too. Earlier I asked, what does every face of the league have in common? Yes, they were all the best, but they were also all from the United States. This is the first time in basketball history that the best players are not from the US, and that'll likely be the case for this decade. So far, Nikola Jokic and Giannis have been the best players of the 2020s, and it's looking like Luka and Wemby will be the best after them. LeBron isn't going to be around forever. He said himself the end is near. Eventually, you're going to have to choose someone. And if that's really the case, and to be the face of the NBA you have to be American, then it makes sense why LeBron at 40 is still the face. Because the young American stars of today are yet to prove themselves worthy on the court, and are doing themselves no favours off the court either. In 1980, you could get away with making love to every girl in America as long as you had that Hollywood smile, and when you stepped on the court it was showtime. LeBron James was the biggest star in America for 20 plus years, and not once was he ever involved in any kind of controversy. You can't say the same for the young stars of today. Potential candidates who had the star power and potentially the talent to be the face have all ended up blowing it for themselves. They tried to push Ja Morant. He decided he'd rather be a wannabe gangster on Instagram Live. They tried to push Zion Williamson. He couldn't control his weight, became injury prone, and got himself in hot water with an adult film star. They are currently pushing Anthony Edwards, and then they found out he's whiling in the streets paying 6-figure abortion fees and not giving a care in the world. At one point they were pushing LaMelo Ball. He has the star power, but he's been irrelevant the past 2 years because he can't stay on the court. So taking everything we've just said into consideration, basically what the NBA is looking for is a star that's marketable from America. Now that we've established that's the criteria, I had to think to myself, who is the biggest American basketball star right now? The answer is obvious, and some of you won't want to hear it, but it's true. It's Caitlin Clark. None of the male American born basketball stars move the needle like she does. Caitlin is the biggest name in college basketball, not just women's, men's too. That's including Bronny. In real life, she has more motion than Bronny James, it's not close. Zach Edey is the 2-time National Player of the Year. His name doesn't hold nearly the same weight as Clark's. Her influence transcends women's sports. People who have never watched women's basketball in their lives are tuning in to watch her games. That is the same kind of influence that Bird, Magic and Michael had. The numbers are mind-blowing. The 2023 men's final reached a record low 14.7 million viewers. The 2023 women's final between LSU and Iowa was watched by 12.6 million. To put these numbers into perspective, the 2023 NBA finals between the Nuggets and Heat averaged 11.6 million viewers per game, which means women's college basketball is competing with the NBA finals. To understand the significance of the Caitlin Clark effect, in 2022, the previous year, 18.1 million people watched the men's final and just 4.2 million watched the women's. Meaning within 1 year, the audience for women's basketball has tripled. But last year was just the beginning. This year, the Caitlin Clark hype has reached historic levels. This season, she became the all-time leading scorer in college basketball history. Not just the women's, but men's too. She surpassed the record previously set by Pete Maravich over 50 years ago. But she isn't just breaking records on the court, she's breaking records off the court too. 4 million people tuned in live to watch her break the scoring record, the highest figures for a college basketball regular season game in 25 years. she has sold out arenas all over the country. Tickets that would usually cost between $10 and $30 are selling in the thousands. People are traveling all over the country, paying whatever it costs just to see her play live. They believe they are witnessing a truly generational athlete. And in terms of talent, she is undeniably generational. Clark is leading the country in scoring and assists. She's averaging 30 and 7 a game. To understand just how box office she actually is, one of Caitlin Clark's games drew 1.8 million live viewers on Super Bowl Sunday. She set Fox Sports viewing figure records during the biggest sports event of the year. The March Madness numbers get crazier every round. Records are being broken every game. The highly anticipated rematch of last year's final, that was the most watched basketball game so far in 2024, men's and women's, NBA included. The Final Four matchup with Paige Beckers was the most viewed women's Final Four game in history. Now everyone knows that this was Caitlin Clark's last year in college. She said she's going to the NBA, she's a lock to be the #1 pick. And the question that everyone's asking is whether or not she'll have the same impact in the pros as she did in college. And this takes us full circle to when Magic and Bird came into the NBA. Never did any of their NBA games, not even in the finals, gather the same viewership as the 1979 NCAA tournament. But fans did follow their careers, and a lot of them became fans of the NBA because they were invested in those players. It all started in college. Last season, the WNBA finals averaged a record 728,000 viewers per game, meaning the WNBA in a record year pulled just 6% of the NBA's lowest finals viewership. Now people will say the reason for this is because people would rather watch men play basketball. But statistically that's not true, because this year in college, men's basketball games are averaging 946,000 viewers per game. Women's basketball games are averaging 981,000 viewers per game, meaning there are more people watching women's basketball than men's. And that's not just Caitlin Clark, that's women's college basketball as a whole. So why are the women becoming more popular than the men? We have to go back to what made college basketball so popular in the past. Continuity, the rivalries. Players weren't one and done like they are today. The best players would spend multiple years in college, and when March Madness came around, you'd be rooting for them to win or lose. Rivalries in college basketball today are more about the programs and their history opposed to the current crop of teams and players. And that's because the best players don't stay long enough to build these rivalries. The reason why the rematch between LSU and Iowa was one of the biggest basketball games of the decade is because it's the sequel to a movie we all loved. Everyone wanted to see the rematch and find out whether or not Caitlin Clark would get her revenge. But when Zion and the Blue Devils were eliminated in 2019, we didn't get to see him, RJ Barrett and Cam Reddish run it back and try to win a national championship. They were all one and done and left for the NBA. The most polarizing names in college basketball, guys like Christian Laettner, JJ Redick, even Grayson Allen. You knew come March you would see them, and whether you wanted them to win or lose, you watched to find out. If those guys were one and done, we wouldn't still be talking about them today. Very soon, Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese will be in the WNBA. Both players are marketable, they have made millions in NIL money, and they have a pre-existing rivalry dating back to college. Angel won the first battle, Caitlin Clark won the second. Both games were must-watch TV, and if we have to wait until the WNBA finals several years from now for the ultimate decider, the trilogy, we'll all be there watching. Those two have a chance to recreate a Magic Bird-like rivalry in women's basketball, the rivalry that made the NBA what it is today. Caitlin is going #1 this year, Paige is projected to be the #1 pick in 2025. You also have Juju Watkins, who had a historic freshman year at USC. She's coming to the WNBA soon as well. There's a lot of high profile names coming, and for the first time ever, the WNBA is about to have high profile basketball superstars in their league. To bring it back to Caitlin Clark though, she will not fade into obscurity when she leaves college. At NBA All-Star Weekend, we saw Steph face off with Sabrina in the 3-point contest, and this opened the door for WNBA stars to be a part of All-Star Weekend, giving them a platform to reach the mainstream NBA audience. The NBA All-Star Weekend is in desperate need of a spark to revive fan interest. Best believe they will find a way to get Caitlin Clark involved, and if done the right way, this could be what saves All-Star Weekend. Caitlin Clark has also been offered $5 million to play in Ice Cube's Big 3 League. Now her rookie salary in the WNBA is expected to be around $70,000 next year, meaning Clark has the opportunity to make a WNBA star's career earnings in one summer. She can make $5 million for 10 3v3 games versus former NBA players. Now we don't know if she'll accept the offer just yet. There's good reasons for and against this. What I do know is that if she does accept and Caitlin Clark is in the Big 3 playing against men who played in the NBA, the Big 3 will sell out crowds and break all kind of viewership records on TV. Everyone is going to want to watch that, especially in the summertime with no other basketball on television. Speaking of the summer, the 2024 Olympics are right around the corner, and the oldest tradition in USA basketball is to take a college player to the Olympics. USA Basketball just released their 14-athlete roster for training camp, and Caitlin Clark is on that list. She'll be in Paris, representing her country, playing alongside Brittany Griner, Brianna Stewart, and other notable WNBA stars. Best believe America will be tuning in to see her try and bring home the gold. And at the Olympics, she will have the opportunity to showcase her talents on the international stage and grow her brand on a global scale while inspiring women worldwide. Caitlin Clark is going nowhere, and wherever she does go, people will follow. As Ice Cube said, she's a generational athlete, and that brings us to my conclusion. When we talk about the face of the NBA, you need to be the best player. You need to be American. You need to be box office and marketable. And you also have to be potentially one of the greatest ever. Caitlin Clark ticks every single box. And I'm gonna ask you if you can say the same for any American-born player in the men's game right now. I don't think you can. Which is why, for the first time in basketball history, the face of the NBA will be in the WNBA. The biggest name in basketball is a woman. And that's not an opinion, that's a fact.